On today's show, NBA executives believe Amen Thompson is poised for a breakout season with the Houston Rockets and so much more from the annual GM survey. We're going to break it all down for you right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Fridays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now is your weekly co-host, Brandon Scott from SportsRadio 610, who you can track down on Instagram at @BScottFromHarem-Clark. Brandon, we got a good show to talk about here today with the Rockets getting some solid representation on the annual GM survey that comes out just before each and every NBA season starts, and the Rockets getting some love. Amen Thompson, Ime Udoka, Kevin Durant, and maybe Alperen Sengun being a little bit overlooked in the GM survey. Just give me your quick reaction to where the Rockets are kind of, how they're being, I guess, respected, by, other NBA executives at this stage.
Man, more than anything, and we'll get into some of the individual notes and nuggets from this, but more than anything, I mean, if you get down to the bottom of it, that there are a few GMs that think the Rockets could win the championship. I know that that's something that we talk about quite a bit because we're Rocket centric, but to think that around the league, there is at least somebody. They're not, league wide predicting the Rockets to win the championship or anything, but they got some votes. And so that stood out to me it seems like early on, before we even really get to see this thing go, there are some people that already believe in the Rockets.
Absolutely. And look, we're gonna start this thing off by focusing in on one Amen Thompson, who had a lot of representation, the most representation on this list of any player, coach, whatever for the Rockets, or any kind of ancillary question just about the team itself. In particular, see, these are some of the categories that Amen Thompson walked away the far and away winner in, or at least receiving some votes for. So the number one category was which player is most likely to have a breakout season in 2025-2026. Amen Thompson received 30% of the available votes. So he came away as the first place winner there. Tied for a three-way tie for second place was Brandon Miller, Asar Thompson, his twin, and Victor Wembanyama, which I thought was a little surprising that Vic wasn't, I guess, higher on this list, because he's already had kind of like, his level of play is already at a level where it's hard to break out further from that. But the way that you'd see Victor Wembanyama being referenced elsewhere on this list, you would think he's poised for a breakout season. And then Franz Wagner came in the fifth spot on that one. But there were a bunch of other categories that he was referenced in, specifically the defensive categories, which I thought stood out as well. Shockingly, Brandon, not regarded as the best perimeter defender in the NBA, which I thought was a little... I don't know how I feel about this one. Amen Thompson clocked in as the third best perimeter defender in the NBA with 22% of the available votes. Alex Caruso came in at number 2 with 24% of the available votes. And then Dyson Daniels from the Atlanta Hawks came in at number 1 with 31% of available votes. Rounding out the top 5, it was Lou Dort in OKC with 14% and Drew Holiday in Portland with 7%. How do you feel about Amen landing at third place as far as the best perimeter defender in the NBA?
Well, this part was confusing to me as well, because if you also look, they gave him most versatile defender in the NBA, right? And I think he does deserve credit for his versatility. He is one of the more versatile defenders in the NBA, and I don't have a problem with him being voted for that. But he is primarily, what he's primarily doing is perimeter defense. He's primarily guarding guys on the perimeter. And so if you think he's the most versatile defender in the NBA and he's primarily defending perimeter players, it would make sense that he would be a candidate, or at least not be third. Like Dyson Daniels winning that did not surprise me as much as maybe Caruso being ahead of Amen and him coming in third. And I probably would have even had him above that. So, or, above Dyson Daniels. So that part surprised me, that they did think he's the most versatile defender. And that's probably because of his athleticism. They show a lot of respect for his athleticism in this survey as well. But to not have him as the most versatile and not have him as the best perimeter defender did catch me a little bit off guard.
Yeah, and look, I think the Caruso stuff is probably a little bit of recency bias, especially with Caruso's performance in the playoffs, which weirdly enough, Caruso wasn't guarding on the perimeter in the playoffs because he was guarding Jokic. Like, what are we doing here? If you were gonna glaze Caruso, then like put him in for the most versatile defender because he was guarding Jokic in the playoffs. Like, what are we doing? So I don't know. Look, he's top 3 perimeter defender in the NBA already after just 2 seasons, already clearing guys like, the other names on the most versatile defender list include Draymond Green, who received 17% of the votes. Amen Thompson got 18%. Giannis Antetokounmpo receiving 13%. And then a 4-way tie between Dyson Daniels, Evan Mobley, and Victor Wembanyama, all receiving 10% of the vote each. And then wrapping things up was OG Anunoby and Lou Dort, each receiving 7% of the available votes. So for Amen Thompson to come away and as the top vote getter of that category with some other very elite defensive forces in the league is, speaks volumes about his growth, his development, kind of where he's at as a player. And then these last 2 categories that had some representation, which player is the most athletic? You alluded to this already. It were just two percentage vote getters in this category. And it was Amen Thompson with 58% of the vote. Like, he crushed this category. His twin didn't even get votes. They're genetically identical, and his twin didn't even get votes in this category. Anthony Edwards, 23% of the available votes. I thought, and now Asar did get like some votes in the little additional receiving votes category, but didn't get enough votes to crack the percentage column, essentially. And then the other one was which player is fastest with the basketball. And Amen Thompson didn't get enough to rank in the percentage of these ones, but he just, in the also receiving votes category was Amen Thompson. Brandon, when you look at this and you see how he's regarded by other NBA executives and just internally what our own thoughts are about Amen Thompson, even, factoring in our own, Houston biases, it really does feel like we are poised for a very significant Amen Thompson year 3 breakout season, where he has not been shy about talking about his desire to be an all-star, which is something that he just told us the other night after the Jazz game.
Yeah, no, and it should be that way for him, right? Like, he's already introduced himself to the league, and I think his place in the Rockets lineup last year showed you that. The fact that they believed in him at the end of games and had him shooting shots to win the game, at certain points last year, showed you that in terms of how they view him internally. And now you're seeing this survey reflect that as well. And so it does not surprise me. I do think that he is poised for a breakout season. The thing that I keep going to, and we talked a little bit about this in the previous episode, and I'll bring it up for, probably for most of the season, is his usage rate is going to go up. So much of the thought is, swapping Kevin Durant for Jalen Green or swapping Jalen Green for Kevin Durant. And that's just like the 1-for-1 comparison. But no, you're bringing in Kevin Durant. Okay. But you're also elevating Amen Thompson. And we've seen this reflected in the preseason already, where he's going to be the guy with the ball in his hands a lot of times, the one that's going to be making a lot of the decisions and with the opportunity to make a lot of the plays. Basically, the way I look at it is Amen Thompson now has the reins that Jalen Green once had here in Houston. And so it's going to look like that in terms of the usage, the belief, and the opportunity. And I think a lot of people feel, and rightfully so, a lot better about his chances of taking advantage of that. So it's an exciting time for Amen Thompson and an exciting time for Rockets fans to watch him play. I actually said this too. For my money, and I cover all the sports here in town, all the sports in Houston. For my money, Amen Thompson, the most exciting and compelling athlete, pro sports athlete to watch here in the city right now.
Ooh, that's a bold claim coming from a guy who actually knows and understands all the other sports in the city. Yes. I am a one sport guy. Sorry, guys.
Take it from me. Take it from me. Just take it from me.
I will say, just to reference the numbers really quick, these past 2 seasons under Ime Udoka, Jalen Green, year 1 under Udoka, had posted a 27.4% usage rating, and then last season a 27.3% usage rating. Meanwhile, Amen Thompson, in just his first 2 seasons as an NBA player, which also coincided with Ime Udoka, a 18.5% usage rating and then a 17.5% usage rating. So that number will certainly go up. I don't know if it'll quite hit the 27 that Jalen Green was at, because as you already alluded to, right, like you're also factoring in KD, you're factoring a bigger role for Alperen Sengun offensively, which we've already seen through 2 preseason games, how much he's handling the basketball, facilitating things. So we will see that Amen number climb. I think it'll probably wind up settling in at like somewhere around 23 to 24% by season's end is kind of where I'm predicting his usage to ultimately fall. But that's a massive step forward for him, with a lot more offensive responsibility, a lot more opportunities, and hopefully something that he's able to, turn into an all-star campaign a little bit later on in the season. But coming up, we're going to be talking about the other names represented on this list for the Houston Rockets, Kevin Durant and his impact on the organization. Ime Udoka, widely regarded as one of the most creative, capable coaches when it comes to schemes and motivation, but not clocking in as one of the best coaches in the NBA. That's a little surprising. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Hey, look, every day we make decisions, but on Prize Picks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss the excitement of this football season with Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Playing Prize Picks is such a fun, simple way to add more excitement to football. You just pick more or less on different player projections, like Josh Allen's passing yards or Saquon Barkley rushing for a touchdown, and you are in the game. It's awesome because you can make your lineup in under a minute. There are so many different great ways to play, and whether you're into football or baseball or basketball, Prize Picks has a way to play for everybody. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's talk a little Kevin Durant on this NBA GM survey. And he only pops up in 2 different categories in this one. One that made absolutely the most sense, in no way you slice any way you slice it, which was which one player acquisition will make the biggest impact. And the Kevin Durant to Houston trade received 73% of the available votes. The Desmond Bane to Orlando trade receiving the remainder of percentage votes, clocking in at 17%. And then also receiving votes was Cooper Flagg, Drew Holiday, and Miles Turner. So weirdly enough, the vote for last year was Paul George at 60% for the 76ers, and we see how that turned out. So hopefully it's not a similar situation in Houston with KD. But the other one that he showed up in, Brandon, I thought this was weird, and this is like, I'm gonna have to expand this because this is like a problem with the whole list, or at least these few categories, is who's the best small forward in the NBA right now. Luka Doncic won this poll with 40% of the available votes. Luka's not a small forward.
Oh, you're spoiling my what about NBA wide take.
Okay. You know what? All right. How about this? We'll just.
But I'm with you. I'm with you conceptually on this. I just want you to know.
This is the perfect tease, because we are going to talk. We're a little bit later in the show. We'll get to the stuff that we wanted to hit on, as far as some of the NBA wide takes, because this is a list to do with the whole NBA. And yes, we are covering the Rockets here at the show, but we do like to, keep the pulse of what's going on with the NBA landscape and kind of share some thoughts, at the NBA at large occasionally on this show. So we'll do that a little bit later on. We'll get up on our soapbox and kind of bemoan the ranking of that system. But let's go to the Ime stuff then. How's this? We'll pump the brakes on the KD combo. We'll go down to Ime. There were a few different categories as far as coaching is concerned on this list. And Ime actually placed very highly in a couple of these categories, 2 of which head coach is the best manager / motivator of people. Eric Spoelstra won this one at 28%. Ime Udoka was second place by a wide margin at 24% of the available votes. And then tied for third place, you had Steve Kerr and Joe Mazzulla, both at 14% apiece, and Ty Lue coming up in 5th with 7% of the available votes. And then another category here, which head coach has the best defensive schemes? Mark Daigneault won this one in a landslide, 37%. Ime Udoka, though, a wide gulf between him and Daigneault, but still a lot of space between him and the third name on the list. Ime Udoka, 23% of the available votes. And then Spo comes in at 13%. Ty Lue, Joe Mazzulla, 10% apiece. What's strange to me here, Brandon, is you've got Ime, who is widely regarded as one of, if a top 2 defensive coach by this list, right? And then a top 2 coach when it comes to motivating his players, a player's coach, if you will, a guy that the players want to play for. And yet, when you look at the actual who are the best head coaches in the NBA, you have Eric Spoelstra, 52% of the vote, Mark Daigneault, 34% of the vote, Ty Lue, 7% of the vote, and then also receiving votes, Rick Carlisle and Nick Nurse, who didn't show up anywhere else. Like Daryl Morey, please, just reveal yourself. We know that you voted for Nick Nurse. I don't think executives are allowed to vote for their own players.
No, they're not.
But still, you know what? I think Daryl Morey put on a mask and when infiltrated another front office to vote for Nick Nurse. Why is Nick Nurse on this list right now? I know historically Nurse has been good, but what the hell, man?
Yeah, no. So I didn't have a problem with any of it until we got to Nick Nurse. That was when I had to put my foot down or kind of just say, well, wait a second here. Because look, the question, to be fair, the question is, it's not who are the best coaches in the NBA, it is who is the best coach in the NBA. And I think all of these guys that are listed above that are listed here, aside from Nick Nurse, are they're guys that have won championships, they're accomplished. You can make legitimate cases for everybody on this list. And of course, Nick Nurse, I understand, but just nobody thinks of him in that way. So he's the one where I would draw the line, but I do understand how you can think highly of Ime Udoka, both as a motivator, as an in-game adjuster, as for defensive schemes, but still not view him as the number one guy in the league. I can certainly understand that. So that part of it is fine with me. I don't get the Nick. I don't know who it was that voted for or how it was that he also received votes on this thing, though. That's the part that confuses me. I also find it interesting how much just winning the championship can change things for you. I know this is kind of an NBA-wide take, and we're not there yet. But Daigneault, getting up to 34%. Last year, Eric Spoelstra was 69%, and he's 52 now. And what's the difference between Eric Spoelstra now and then, right? He's still the same guy. It's the other guy winning the championship. So that part stood out to me. But no, Ime Udoka, every spot where he's on this list, he makes sense to be on the list. And then the spots where he's not on the list, Jackson, it also makes sense for him not to be on that list. Like where it says which head coach runs the best offense. Well, Ime Udoka, that's the one spot where his name doesn't appear at all. And you can understand that, right? And of course, the one about who's the best coach. Which I could also understand him not being on there. I just don't quite understand him not being on there in the absence of or for Nick Nurse. I don't quite get that one.
I think building off your same logic, though, every single coach there, including Nick Nurse, has won a championship.
Yes, including right? Nick Nurse. I don't want to take away from that.
Sure. And so I think that certainly there's a certain level of heavy lifting that actually winning a title does for you as a coach. I mean, hell, Doc Rivers has been coasting off that Celtics title for a minute now. But look, I do think that at the end of the day, Ime Udoka, while he is, I think, very clearly a championship caliber head coach, right? He hasn't been able to reach the mountaintop just yet. And we have very high hopes here in Houston that he will be able to achieve that with this Rockets team or some iteration of this Rockets team. Clearly, the organization believes in him with giving him that contract extension. He'll be here all the way through 2030, it appears. He kind of let that slip at Media Day that he'll be here for the next 6 years, or at least under contract for the next 6 years. And so they're clearly trying to build something with him, and they really do believe in him as a championship caliber head coach. I do think when we start looking at Ime, right, and we've talked about this at various points this offseason, the next step forward for Ime, we talk about players, we talk about development, how can players get better, what can they improve? The next step forward for Ime is, what does his offense look like this season, right? Ime, through 2 years, the Rockets offense has been a little bare bones, right? Very vanilla at times, very simplistic, not a lot of actions, not a lot of, not a ton of passing, nothing like the beautiful game Spurs or anything, which Ime was a part of. He was on that coaching staff. So he has experience with, teams that do a lot more offensively. They run more actions, they run more design sets and plays and things of that nature, as opposed to just, a quick action and screen and roll, whatever, and then get into some isolation play, hunting a mismatch, things of that nature. And that's the beauty of the addition of Kevin Durant and thinking about his impact for this team, is what does the addition of KD as well as the further maturation of Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson allow Ime Udoka to unlock offensively for this team, as well as even like Jabari Smith Jr. playing with a ton more confidence and looking more aggressive out there? It really does feel like, and we're overreacting to 2 preseason games, but that's sometimes what we do here. The offense looks night and day better, even though it looks clunky at times with the lack of a de facto ball handler, and that Reed and Amen need to get up to speed there. The offense looks a lot better through a couple games with more movement, more off-ball movement when Alperen Sengun has the ball, more design sets to get KD in the spots that he wants the basketball, to get him, either downhill off of a curling off a screen, or little flare screen actions off the ball to get him opened up, little things like that. And that's where I think Ime could really make a name for himself, is skyrocketing up the offensive list of head coaches here, at this time next year on the GM survey. Yeah,
I agree with all of that. And I think it reflects sort of the chicken or the egg kind of thought of like, so which one is it? Is it that the coach isn't that creative offensively, or does he not believe that he has the personnel to run a more expanded playbook, for lack of a better term, right? So like, now that you have different pieces, is that meaning that you're going to now do the different things? We're going to see more of that. Everything that you just described is now available to Ime Udoka in a way that it was not before, which could sort of explain the primitive offense that we're talking about in previous years, right? So now that you've got more skilled players, particularly Kevin Durant, and like you mentioned, I think just as important as adding Kevin Durant is the maturation that you mentioned of Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson. All of that goes together, which is why this is such a perfect fit. Not to mention that they play well. I think their games play well off of each other. So yeah, I think hoping for big things, and the expectations rising for Ime Udoka in terms of what they do offensively.
We'll say one more area of Rockets representation here. Best assistant coach in the NBA, Royale Ivey clocked in at 3rd place with 11% of the votes. Mike Nori in Minnesota had 25% of the available votes. And then JVG with the LA Clippers had 14% of the votes. Sam Cassell and Chris Quinn both tied for 4th place with 7% of the available votes, both in Boston and Miami, respectively, for those guys. But coming up, was Alperen Sengun overlooked anywhere on this list, as well as just some general NBA takeaways from this GM survey? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss out on. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, $5 only, and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app, which is great because they have so many different ways to play. You can build out different parlays, you can try player props, or you can even follow the live betting lines during games. Or if you don't want to do all that and you just want to keep it simple, you can go take a look at the outright betting favorites for the Super Bowl this season. Right now, the Bills at plus 500, the Lions plus 750, the Packers at plus 800, the Eagles plus 1,000, and then the Chiefs sitting at plus 1,100. So for all those odds and so much more, visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Today's episode is also brought to you by Quo, formerly OpenPhone. One of the tools that help make a huge difference for business owners is Quo, formerly OpenPhone. It's the same great business phone system you've heard me talk about before, just with a brand new name. And here's why it matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or your computer, so no more carrying 2 phones or relying on an outdated landline. Quo is great because it allows your team to collaborate on calls and texts together. They have a shared inbox feature that is a total game changer, so no customer gets left behind. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly OpenPhone. Get started free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedonnba. That's QUO.com/lockedonnba. And if you've got existing numbers with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Brandon, we're going to get back to we'll get to the soapbox that we were about to step on with KD a moment ago. But really quickly here, I do find it interesting, at least, that Alperen Sengun, who's been the Rockets' best player 2 years in a row, he's, no longer on paper going to be the team's best player. You add a superstar in Kevin Durant, although if we have this breakout superstar season for Alperen Sengun, maybe he'll have something to say about that by year's end. But I find it interesting that he really wasn't referenced anywhere on this list. He shows up exactly one time, and that is under the category of which player is most likely to have a breakout season. And Amen Thompson, his teammate, won that poll, in a landslide, 30%. But in the also receiving votes category was Alperen Sengun, as well as Reed Shepherd, as well as Jabari Smith Jr. So multiple Rockets all receiving votes as potential breakout player, player candidates this season. And I guess it's harder when you envision, like, he was already an all-star last year. He already put up massive numbers last season. How much further can you really break out, right? Like we talked about this before about who's going to have the bigger year the bigger leap between Sengun and Amen. There's just more for Amen to grab because he has more to improve. He has more space to grow in his game, just from a sheer production standpoint than LP does. But going to, I guess, one other category, right? The who's the best center in the NBA poll. Jokic won in a landslide, 97% of the votes. Wemby clocked in 3%. So he got, a tiny little bit off the top. But for Sengun to not even be mentioned as an also receiving votes or any of that, or really any other name in the NBA for that matter. I get it. Jokic is the best player in the NBA. Therefore, he is the best center in the NBA. And arguably, not even arguably, he is the best player in the world right now. So I get that. But at the same time, it's just, I find it interesting that LP didn't manage to squirrel his way into any of these categories throughout the whole list.
Yeah. So the center one stood out to me because, on the one hand, you could make the argument, and maybe this is just me voting for Nikola Jokic if I were given a vote, but I think you could make the argument for Nikola Jokic getting 100% of the votes, right? Nobody getting any other votes, and it just being Jokic, and we don't get cute, and we just leave it where it's at, where we all understand it to be, because as you mentioned, he's the best player in the world. But if somebody else is going to get votes, or if there are going to be more votes, you would think that Alperen Sengun would be on the short list of folks to get him. So the fact that it would just be Wemby to show up there aside from Jokic, and that there would be not just Albie, but nobody else, just Jokic and Wemby and nobody else, to me is surprising. It's almost like an all or nothing thing. It's either all Jokic or there should be some mention of Alperen Sengun. So that part of it, I think, stood out to me. Also, the breakout season, Amen Thompson, I think, rightfully wins this category. But then when you start to get into the other guys that got 10%, where it's Brandon Miller, Amen's twin, Ausar Thompson, which, look, I think that Alperen Sengun has a better chance for a breakout season than Ausar does, just given his role and given how much he's going to have the ball and all of that kind of thing. So, that's the part that stood out to me. Less so his teammate, but his teammate's twin showing up much higher than he did on this list. And of course, Victor Wembanyama, I got a tough time with that when we kind of talked about this earlier of where exactly. And I'm curious on the logic of different voters, how they view breakout. Different people can define different terms differently. Were they given prompts and instructions on how to define a specific term, who's not eligible, but who makes sense for a breakout? But to me, Alperen Sengun should be higher on both of those specific lists. Now it is tough to, look at Jokic and make an argument for Sengun against Jokic when so much of the conversation around Jokic is him trying to chase his own version or be some sort of facsimile of that. So it is a little tough to complain about, but I find curious because I would expect him to appear more on a list where you see Amen Thompson appear as much as he does, and you see the Rockets and the belief in the Rockets, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the belief in the Rockets being what it is. He's got to be a major part of that. So yeah, and not to mention too, in Sengun's mind, there are some ways where he wasn't as good last year. I think he's talking about offensively specifically, because I think he did make some improvements on the defensive end of the floor, but he doesn't even think he was as good last year as he was the year before when he didn't make the All-Star team. And so I feel like he, in his own mind, has got a lot to prove to himself. So So yeah, it is an interesting list from that standpoint.
Definitely. And I think going back to really quickly, the breakout season thing last year, the name who won the poll was J-Dub from OKC, but he won it with 13% of the votes. It was really split last year. I don't know who the other names were on the list for last year. But they always include the winner of like the previous year's poll. And I find it interesting that comparatively to this season, right, 30% of the voters are going for Amen Thompson. Like they are bought in on Amen taking a leap this year. And we know that J-Dub this past year became an all-star, right? And he had his, welcome to the NBA finals and had the 40 piece. And like he was fantastic for OKC, a big part of their title run last year. So hopefully the same can be said about Amen Thompson a year from now. One other category here that we missed out on that didn't really fall under the purview of a specific player, but which team has the most promising young core? I thought, the Rockets deserved maybe a little bit more of the vote than they got here. OKC clocked in at 50%, which I get. Their big three are all incredibly young. They've got the youngest roster in the entire NBA. They're fresh off a title. That's a budding dynasty waiting to happen. It sucks, but it's probably going to happen. The Spurs at 27%. Wemby's doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. Like I like Steph Castle as much as the next guy, but Wemby is doing Wemby is like 25% of that 27% in San Antonio, I think. And then Detroit and Houston tied for third place with 10% of the available votes. And I'll be honest, Brandon, just stacking up the Houston Rockets young core to the Pistons young core, I think I'm taking the Rockets over the Pistons. Like Cade is really nice, but then there's like a major drop off after Cade when you get some of the other young names on the roster versus the Rockets who have a star-studded dynamic duo in Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson and elite role players in Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, Reed Shepherd being kind of the one big question mark of their young core. At least how I feel. That's at least how I feel about that one.
Yeah, I'm with you on taking the Rockets over the Pistons. So this list and the voting here does not reflect that, but I think a lot of that has to do with, if we're just being real about it, it has to do with Oklahoma City and San Antonio being the clear in 1 and 2. And you're right, Wemby is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for San Antonio, but I can't really blame people if they're still bought in. Like, the blood clot injury situation last year kind of robbed them of a season, but there's no real reason to not believe that thing is not going to work out the way a lot of people are expecting it to. So if I'm just being objective about it, I would have Oklahoma City and San Antonio as the clear 1 and 2. And I don't know how the voting actually fell after that in terms of who's voting for Houston and who's voting for Detroit, but it's not reflected here. But I do think that Houston should be considered, like their 10 should be worth more. Their 10% should be worth more than the Pistons 10%. I think. Yeah. I think the fact that the 1 and 2 were so clear that after that it didn't really matter as much. As been, you can see that in the difference of percentage from 27 down to 10. But yeah, no, give me this Rockets core. And I do also think that the Kevin Durant thing, a big part of what's promising about the Rockets is a guy who's not young. They got a promising young core, but the thing that's going to put them over the top this year, if they do indeed go over the top, would be the addition of the old guy, the guy that's my age. So yeah, no, so I do get that part of it, but give me the Rockets core over the Pistons core, and certainly over the Magics. I mean,
all right.
Not even see how they got in there.
Let's get back to our soapbox here for a moment before we wrap things up, and that is we'll go back to who's the best small forward in the NBA, and this is where we had some issues, Brandon. I'll let you go off on this list because I think the whole positional argument from point guard, two guard, small forward, power forward, center. The power forward center ones are pretty much a lock because that's Giannis, Jokic. Fine, cool, no ambiguity there. I did not like how they tallied the votes on point guard, shooting guard, and small forward at all across this poll. How'd you feel about it, Brandon?
It's the argument against the positions being part of the list. And I know if you take them out, you take out a big chunk of the survey, but it reflects just how differently the game is played, because you can see here that even the basketball experts don't know what to do with Luka Doncic. They don't know whether to call him a point guard or a small forward because he's 6'7" and he's, round, like he doesn't look like a point guard. So
look, he was spread across 3 different polls. He had 17% of the point guard poll, so he's second place there. He was tied for tied for third, 7% of the shooting guard poll, and then he won the small forward poll with 40%. But here's the thing: last year he won the point guard poll with 37% of the votes. So, like, what is it? What are we doing here?
What I'm trying to figure out about the polling and about the voting, actually, though, is are these people voting for him for multiple positions? Like, do you have some of them that are just voting for him as a point guard, and then you got other GMs that are just voting for him as a small forward? Or are dudes getting there at that, when they take their survey, they're like, yep, point guard, yep, Luka Doncic, small forward, yep, Luka Doncic too. Which of it is happening? And look, this is part of this is a credit to, I think, Luka Doncic, but also a credit to the evolution of the game. That a guy could dominate three or be at least present in three different positions. But I don't like it. To me, it's unclear. And I do think that, you should stick with it. Like, Luka Doncic is a point guard. He's a point guard in a small forward's body. I don't think that he should get credit for being, a point guard in a small forward's body by being voted the best small forward in the game. I had a problem with that, and to me, it is an argument against highlighting positions if guys are going to be, this versatile or do this many things.
And then if you just remove Luka from that small forward conversation, that leaves Jason Tatum receiving 20% of the votes as the best small forward in the NBA, and then Kevin Durant 17% of the remaining available votes as the third best small forward in the NBA after Luka, who's not a small forward, and JT. I think that's about I think that's very much that's the legitimate argument, right? It's very much between Jason Tatum and Kevin Durant. I think it's about a little bit more of what you want. Obviously, Jason Tatum a little bit younger, maybe a little bit more of, of a defensive impact, especially at the point of attack, that kind of thing. But I think KD, in a vacuum, KD can score. He's a 99th percentile scorer, one of the most gifted to ever touch a basketball in that regard. I think I might be taking KD over Jason Tatum. That might be some hometown cooking, but
but you know what? And I would take KD over Jason Tatum, just for the record. But I would also go back to my earlier point. Like, even those guys, Jason Tatum is probably the closest thing to like a traditional, the traditional thought of what a small forward is and looks like. But even those guys can play no less than two positions, and sometimes three, given their length, depending on what the lineup is. And so, they're small forward. I'm not having a gripe with them being called small forwards, but I'm just saying the game is just so different now. And there's been a lot of literature on this, on either whether you want to look at a position list or multiple positions, like the idea that there's a dozen positions out there, at least, that they're playing. But no, in the more traditional sense, I wouldn't mind if Tatum won this for no other reason, like Kevin Durant is, a shooting guard, a small forward, a power forward, and any given, like, Tatum is the most traditional sense of the small forward to me, but Kevin Durant, the better player, to me, by a mile.
Absolutely. And it was a fun list to kind of pick apart. And we definitely want your thoughts on the Rockets representation of this list, as well as just the NBA side of things. If there's anything else on this list that you thought was interesting or weird or surprising, give us your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But Brandon, you know the drill. Let everyone know where to track you down at.
Yeah, so y'all hit me up at B Scott from Hiram Clark on Instagram, also the B Block Podcast. We do that every week. You can find it wherever you get your podcast, and also on YouTube, and also Sports Radio 610.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.